to the statement, Plan for Change, Milestones for Mission-Led Government. Pat McFadden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And with your permission, I would like to make a statement about the next phase of the Government's programme. In July, we set out our legislative programme. In October, we set out our financial plan, and today we set out our plan for change. When we were elected, we said we would have 5 long-term missions for the country: to grow the economy, to build an NHS fit for the future, to break down the barriers to opportunity, to take back our streets, and to make the UK a clean energy superpower. These missions mark an important and fundamental break from the record of chaos that we saw under the previous administration. The constant changes in policy that prevented government from facing up to long-term problems, that held people back, and worst of all, helped spread the belief that politics and government could no longer deliver for people. In fact, by the end, they had given up even trying. We will never submit to the fatalism that says government cannot deliver change for people. We don't believe that living standards have to stagnate as they did in the last Parliament. We don't accept the lowest levels of satisfaction with the NHS ever recorded, which is what we inherited when we came into power. We don't believe that a tawdry surrender to Tory backbenchers should be allowed to cut off the dream of home ownership for the next generation. And we will not sit back and accept young children falling behind their peers even before they start school, damaging their opportunities for the rest of their lives. A break with all of that is more than a political choice. It is a national necessity. So today, we turn the page on that record. We reject the hopelessness that it fostered, and we set out milestones for each of our missions and the foundations which underpin them. We've already stabilised the public finances. We've announced £22 billion more for the NHS. We are increasing the schools budget by over £2 billion. We have rejected the plans that we inherited from the party opposite to cut back on capital investment and cut back on the country's future. Instead, we want to build the schools, build the hospitals, build the houses, build the transport infrastructure that the country needs. Investments which the party opposite now say they support, even though they reject every means of raising the revenue to pay for them. That proves only one thing, that they have given up on the pretence of being the party of sound money and given up on being a serious political party at all. Now, our plan for change sets out the key milestones for the country. 1. Raise living standards in every part of the United Kingdom so that working people have more money in their pockets no matter what part of the country in which they live. 2. Build 1.5 million homes and fast-track planning decisions on at least 150 major infrastructure projects. That is more than in the last 14 years combined. 3. Tackle the hospital backlogs by meeting the NHS standard of patients waiting no longer than 18 weeks for elective treatment in England. 4. A named police officer for every neighbourhood and 13,000 additional officers, PCSOs and special constables in neighbourhood teams in England and Wales. 5th, secure homegrown energy while also protecting bill payers so that we want to be on track for clean power by 2030. And 6, give children the best start in life by seeing a record percentage of 5-year-olds in England ready to learn when they start school. And underpinning these are the strong foundations the country needs. Economic stability is the foundation for growth after a budget that restored stability to the public finances and put in place the investment to move the country forward. Reducing net migration from the record high level inherited from the previous government, clearing the asylum backlog and increasing returns of people who do not have a right to be here, work that has already begun. And fulfilling the government's first duty of protecting our people through strong national security. These are the milestones in our plan for change. Now, none of them are easy, but worthwhile change seldom is. and to deliver them will require relentless focus and facing up to the trade-offs involved. Governing is not just about what you want to do, it is also about how you want to do it. And so to deliver these goals, we have to reform the state itself. That's why we want value for money and are cracking down on fraud and waste through the new COVID Corruption Commissioner. That's why we will raise £6 billion by going after tax avoiders, and unlike the party opposite, we're putting in the money to make it happen. That's why the Chancellor demanded efficiency and productivity savings of 2% from each government department next year. That's why we want to get more people off welfare and into work. That's why we will tackle the delays and blocks in our planning system to make it faster to get things built. The old debate was just about government budgets. The new debate has to be about how those budgets are used, how people are equipped with the right technology and the right systems to deliver. So each time we will ask, is power being devolved enough? Is technology being used enough? Are we learning enough from those on the front line? And we will, Madam Deputy Speaker, have more to say about reform of the state soon. Now, I know there may be scepticism from those who first accused us of being far too cautious and now accuse us of being far too ambitious. But stop and think, what would happen if we didn't set goals like this? Politics needs a change when more people have lost faith in its capacity to deliver. And the government system itself needs change to focus on the goals that we have set. If we just carried on in the same old pattern, we'd have too many children not ready to start school, opportunity cut off within the first few years of their lives. We would carry on with huge NHS waiting lists, hurting both our people and our economy. We would have more and more young people cut off from having a home of their own, asking what all their effort and hard work would ever lead to. We'd continue with too many of our town centres no-go zones for people after dark, and we'd still be at the mercy of dictators when it came to our energy prices. And perhaps most of all, we'd have an economy like the one they ran, where living standards continued to stagnate, just as they did in the last Parliament. And if we did that, the loss of faith would simply carry on. So it's not a matter of whether we should do this. We have to do this to stop the country falling behind and to meet the challenges that we face. And if we do meet these goals, we will have a country where living standards are rising, more children are ready for school, where fewer people are waiting in pain for NHS treatment, where more people have a chance to have a home of their own, and where our streets are safer because we have the community police that we need. Madam Deputy Speaker, that is change worth having, change worth fighting for, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Alex Burghart.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the right honourable gentleman for advance sight of his statement. Very nice to receive it only 12 hours after the Times newspaper. And although I must say I only received the policy document itself at 11:05, unlike Labour MPs at the Pinewood studios, who, according to social media, had the document some time before. I do hope, whilst the Prime Minister is in Pinewood, he will hear from the concerns of their owners about the very substantial increase in business rates from 2026 that is going to affect their profits and the viability of what was, under the Conservatives, a flourishing sector. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we all on this side of the House want to congratulate the Government on its most recent reset. There are only a few more resets left before Christmas. The Labour Party may like to try turning it off and, well, maybe just leaving it off. But it's good that they have taken the time to come up with an emergency list of priorities. After only 14 years in opposition and 5 months in power, they finally decided some things they're going to work towards. The right honourable gentleman in his statement was quite punchy about the past. Actually unusually punchy for the right honourable gentleman. One could say that if the right honourable gentleman is rattled, and he is not the rattling type, it is a sign that the government itself must be feeling pretty unstable at the moment. We had, and the benches opposite talk about legacy, and I mean this genuinely. I wish them good fortune in government. The last government had to clean up the mess from the greatest financial crisis in a century. From the greatest financial crisis in a century. The last government had to deal with the biggest pandemic in a century. The last government had to deal with the biggest war in Europe since 1945. And the right honourable members and right honourable members opposite might like to gloss over that. They might like to pretend it's not important. But history judges that very differently. And it reflects very badly on the Labour Party that it refuses to acknowledge the importance of those extremely significant events. Let us turn to each of the new millstones in order. Number one, raising living standards in every part of the United Kingdom so that working people have more money in their pockets no matter where they live. How is this to be measured? What are the metrics? When will the data be published? Who will be held to account? We all need to know. Second, to build 1.5 million homes and fast-track planning decisions, the OBR have already said that this government is unlikely, very unlikely, to build more homes than the last Conservative government. What has changed since the budget? Why do they now believe that they will be able to achieve this? Is there more money? Have the spending plans changed? Option 3, tackle hospital backlogs. But we've already seen funding first, reform later. Disastrous way to do business. And the NHS bosses who've been briefed about this, already briefing the press, saying that this requirement is going to put enormous pressure on A&E without additional money, additional to the money that was given at the budget. Is there more money going to be made available for the NHS to fulfil option 3? 4, policing. Only 3,000 of the 13,000 neighbourhood police officers are extra new police officers. Only 3,000 of the 13,000. This target is not genuine. Is there a proposal to deal with the backlog in the courts? Without that, extra police officers will only lead to greater backlog in the courts. Does the Labour Party have a plan for this? 5, energy. In March, the government, in their missions document, said that by 2030, the UK will be the first major country in the world to run 100% clean and cheap power. So since March, it's been degraded by 5%. Can we expect this target to be degraded by 5% every 9 months? 6, children, ready to learn. A wonderful target, genuinely wonderful target. What does the right honourable gentleman mean by ready to learn? How will it be measured? When will the House be told how progress is being made? Now, obviously, on all of these things, there are good things to be done. But the missions only mean anything if the government is honest about what it is doing, about the milestones it is hitting or not hitting, and also why it has downgraded certain other priorities. Like, how has it chosen these 6 issues over immigration, over GP surgeries, over A&E, over defence, over the 300 energy bill reduction target, over becoming the fastest growing economy in the G7? Why has the government chosen the priorities it has? The House should be told. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, who is taking responsibility for achieving these targets? I mean, who is taking real responsibility? I think a lot of us were pleased when the Health Secretary the other day said that individuals at the top of the health service would be held accountable with their jobs if targets were not hit. Will the same thing apply to ministers? Who in government is taking real responsibility for these targets? So if the government is serious, we need data, we need accountability, and we need transparency. Will the right honourable gentleman guarantee to the House that we will get that?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I spent more of my life than I would have liked in opposition, and I learned one thing about being in opposition, which is you have to decide what your attack is. And as I listened to the honourable member, I wasn't sure whether he supported the plan or whether he opposed the plan. He refers to millstones. let me tell him very clearly, the only millstone that this government and this country have is the appalling legacy left by the party opposite. And let us contrast what we are announcing today with their milestones of failure. They had record-high waiting lists, the worst parliament for living standards on record, a surrender on house building, a failure on infrastructure, a £22 billion hole in the public finances. Those are their milestones of failure. These are our choices today. The metrics by which we measure things are set out in the document before the House today. These are targets that will make a real difference to people's lives. Higher living standards across the country, more housing, fewer people on NHS waiting lists, more community police, the best start in life for all children. This is already measured when children start school at the age of 5. They already measure this, and let me tell him what his government's record was. It fell under his government, and our plan is to raise that so that 3 out of 4 children can start school ready to learn. That is the measure that we will choose. The truth is, the party opposite couldn't tackle the challenges we set out today, and they know it. They couldn't unblock the housing system or get the growth the country needs, because they are the ones blocking the new housing and the infrastructure that we need. They couldn't fix the schools or the hospitals or get more police in the streets, because they are still saying they support the investment while opposing any revenue measure that pays for it, thereby sacrificing any reputation or economic competence that they have. What a contrast, and we will not subscribe to the fatalistic view that all we can look forward to is more of the kind of failure we saw over the last 14 years. We believe in setting out plans that will improve people's lives, because we know that a united government with a clear sense of priorities, prepared to do the hard yards and make the difficult long-term choices for the country, can deliver a better future for people. And that is what is set out in the plan that we published today.
Turmaine.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's plan for change, which will ensure that the government is focused on delivery and not the dither that we've seen for the last 14 years from the party opposite. I especially welcome the NHS target of 18 weeks. The last Labour government was able to deliver that target, and NHS satisfaction levels were at their highest in history. Their highest in history. Yes. 14 years of the party opposite of running the NHS into the ground has left it in an appalling state. And does my right honourable friend agree with me that this must never be allowed to happen again?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I absolutely agree with my right honourable friend. When we came into office in 1997, we were also faced with an NHS that was in severe difficulty. Let me be clear with the House. Meeting this target is extremely challenging, but we believe that by setting it, by driving the system towards it, we can make real progress towards reducing waiting lists. And what a contrast in terms of what the public felt. When we left office in 2010, the public satisfaction rates with the NHS were at their highest ever recorded. When we came back into office in July this year, those satisfaction levels were at their lowest levels ever recorded. That is what we're trying to turn around through the plan that we published today.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank also the Secretary of State for advance sight of the statement. This new government has followed the disaster of the previous Conservative administration. The Conservatives broke the NHS, they crashed the economy with the disastrous mini-budget, and they managed the staggering feat of delivering 5 Prime Ministers in 6 years. It shouldn't exactly be a hard act to follow. And yet, too many people feel like this new government still isn't listening to them. When my colleagues and I speak to our constituents, they simply cannot comprehend decisions like the increase in national insurance, which will hurt jobs just as we need to get the economy growing, or the tax on family farms, or the utterly misguided removal of the winter fuel payment. So The Secretary of State will forgive me if I approach today's announcement with a degree of scepticism. New targets are all well and good, but people have heard lots of pledges and targets like these before. But as they know all too well, without a proper plan for delivery, they fail. And I hope that the Government recognises that pursuing these targets at the expense of all the other things left broken by the Conservatives will not cut it. The British public will not be taken for fools. And on this point, I want to focus on the NHS. Yes, bringing down waiting lists for treatment is a crucial part of the picture, but doing so at the cost of neglecting A&E waits or the ability to see your GP is like robbing Peter to pay Paul. And we know that to fix the crisis in the NHS, we must also fix the crisis in our care system too. And it is on fixing health and care and delivering on the issues which people care about most that we on the Liberal Democrat benches will continue to hold this government to account. So can the Secretary of State tell me when we will hear more detail about how this plan is to be delivered, and particularly about spending allocations for the NHS to fix our hospitals and to reduce those waiting lists? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the questions from the Liberal Democrat spokesperson. But she's right to point out the record of the Conservatives, but I do have to gently say that she too seems to support extra spending but oppose all the revenue-raising measures that go towards it. And the truth is, if we are serious, we cannot do that. The reason we've had to raise revenue was because of the appalling legacy that we inherited, that we had to stabilise the public finances and we had to fix the situation we were left with. Now that we have done that, we can look forward to delivering on these key goals. Now, she asks how this is going to be paid for. There will be a spending review next year, as she knows, but already we've announced £22 billion extra for the NHS over the next couple of years, which is accompanied by the reforms that the Secretary of State for Health has set out.
Johanna Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This Labour government's plans to make work pay will give thousands of workers in my constituency of Paisley and Renfrewshire South a much-needed pay rise after 14 years of failure by the party opposite. Does the Minister agree that plans to support low-paid workers in insecure jobs will be crucial, but not only crucial, absolutely central to our plan for change?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome what she said about pay. The Chancellor announced a significant increase in the minimum wage at the time of the budget a few weeks ago. Of course, we want public sector workers and everybody who helps to deliver a plan to be rewarded well, but it's also got to come with change in the way that the state works to make sure we get the best value for money, the best productivity, we make the best use of technology. We cannot have this just in the private sphere. We've got to apply it to the public sphere as well to make sure we get the best bang for the taxpayer's buck.
Sir Bernard Jenkin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I assure the Right Honourable Gentleman I don't think anybody doubts the sincerity of the new government that wants to achieve these laudable aims. But can I just remind him of John Lennon's line, "Life is what happens while you're making other plans." And notably absent from these priorities are priorities like reducing the national debt or dealing with the demographic challenge or dealing with the lack of defence and security that we need to build up in order to confront global challenges. Are these the only priorities of the government? Or will we see a bigger list that deals with some of these really existential challenges that threaten the independence and survival of our country itself?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Right Honourable Member's question. He referred to defence and security, and I did deliberately mention this in my remarks because it's an absolute foundation that the first duty of any government is to protect its people, and that's why there is a specific section in the document on it and why it's an underpinning foundation for the goals that we've set out today.
Matthew Patrick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I listened carefully to the Shadow Minister's reply, and it sounded to me like he welcomes much of the investment that our government will deliver, but funnily enough, he won't support any measures to pay for them. And I was always taught the Tories were against a something-for-nothing culture. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this will only compound the Tories' reputation for economic recklessness?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do think they have a problem because the new Leader of the Opposition stood at that dispatch box a couple of weeks ago and said that she supported all the extra investments. So every time they then stand up and oppose the revenue measures that are designed to fund them, all they do is expose their own economic incoherence. It's quite simple. If they support the investments, then they have to either support the revenue measures that we've set out or set out alternative revenue-raising measures to meet the investments they support. So far, they have utterly failed to do that.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And 5 months in and after a budget that the Office for Budget Responsibility says will lower growth over 5 years, increase inflation and reduce the number of people in jobs, it is extraordinary to see a document that has so many areas not covered. I want to probe the Right Honourable Gentleman specifically on his goal of increasing disposable income for working people. What would he say to those older people? In shocking news last week, Marie Curie Cancer Care says that there are 44,000 terminally ill older people who will not get their winter fuel allowance this year. And is he going to be judged also by his government's actions?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, every government is judged by its actions and indeed by the legacy that it leaves to its successors. And the reason we had to take the decision on winter fuel was precisely because of the legacy that her government left to us. We do want to see a rise in people's living standards, in their disposable income. It stagnated under the last Parliament. And let's not forget how unusual that was. This was the first Parliament in living memory where living standards stagnated across the whole Parliament. We aim to change that and make sure people see rising living standards wherever they live in the country.
Julie Minns.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as a child in Denton Home in Carlisle, PC Kevin Scott was a very familiar figure. He knew us and we knew his name. Does the Minister agree with me that not only does society exist, but that it is woven from thousands of communities like Denton Home, and that our commitment to reintroducing named community police officers will strengthen those communities, strengthen society and take back our streets?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Let me praise PC Kevin Scott and other officers like him who are known in the community. And while I'm here, Madam Deputy Speaker, Kenny, our PCSO on Bilston High Street, who helps to keep us safe. And what we want to see is more named officers like that so that people know who's keeping their streets safe, can put a face to the name and restore proper community policing to make our streets safe and make our town centre safe.
Brendan O'Hara.
Speaker, however the Minister might try to dress this up, there is an unmistakable whiff of panic about it, because one would have thought that a decade and a half of opposition would have been ample time to prepare a plan for change, rather than relaunching a government whose 5-year plan seems to have unravelled after just 5 months. But I was particularly interested, however, to hear about the government's commitment to reform the state, saying that each time we'll be asking, is power being devolved enough? Given that the Scottish Government has asked for the powers of migration, employment law and the Constitution to devolve, when can we expect to see some action on this reform of the state and this important commitment to devolution?
Madam Deputy Speaker, he calls this a reset or a relaunch. I hate to break this to him, but the government that he supports in Scotland produces a programme for government every single year. Does that mean they're resetting or relaunching every year, or does he only use that accusation for us? Now, he also asks about devolution. we were the party that created devolution because we believed in a powerful Scottish Parliament. We still do, and it's just received its biggest real terms increase in funding since devolution came into being. He missed out his thanks to the Labour Chancellor that made that happen.
Paul Wall.
And I welcome this statement today, a real plan for change, a real plan for hope. It's clear the Conservatives don't like us talking about their record, but that record in constituencies like mine had a real-world impact, particularly when it came to bobbies on the beat. 14 years stripping bobbies on the beat, and as my right honourable friend says, neighbourhood policing stripped out from many local communities. So can I welcome today particularly the requirement in this plan to have more neighbourhood policing, which will make a real-world impact on my constituency.
I thank the member for Rochdale for his question, and he's absolutely right, because we saw huge cuts in the number of police officers after the party opposite came into power, and that really affected the neighbourhood community policing teams that we had set up during our period in government. And what we want to make sure is that there are proper neighbourhood policing teams in every community with a named officer so that people can feel safe on their streets and safe in their communities. It is an absolute underpinning to the quality of life. There is no freedom if people don't feel safe, and that's why it's such a core part of the plan that we produced today.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Minister's commitment to revitalising faith in democratic politics, and I agree with him that government can be a force for good. But he will know that perhaps the biggest macroeconomic challenge we face is productivity. He's mentioned it indeed today. So I'm disappointed to see in this plan no real mention of workforce skills, and neither any mention of national economic resilience in terms of growing more of the food that we eat and making more of the goods we need. So will the Minister look at those two areas and set productivity targets for which ministers can be accountable, so that it's not just what we spend, but what we get for what we spend, we really count?
I thank the honourable member for his question, and he might have noticed that I said this in my opening remarks. I do think an old debate just about the size of the budget is not enough for the situation that we face. Of course budgets matter, of course resources matter, of course investment matters, but so too does reform, the way the state works, the application of technology, the balance between what is done centrally and what is done in devolved areas. So alongside any delivery goals, there has to be a real plan to make it happen that does reform the state, and I'm clear that that must go alongside the goals that we've set out today.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Waiting lists on the NHS have already been mentioned today, but they need mentioning again, because the last 14 years has made such a difference to constituents in Truro and Falmouth. They have really struggled to work and to live, having to wait 1-2 years for orthopaedic operations. So please could the Secretary of State speak again about what has already been done to deal with those waiting lists and how that will lead on into the future.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, this is such a hugely important problem for the country, because at the level they are now, it isn't just bad for those waiting a lengthy period of time for NHS treatment, though of course it is. It's also bad for the economy, because we've got so many people in that position. Now, they have started to fall slightly since we came into office, but it's going to take a long and sustained effort and a combination of investment and reform. I am glad that we were able to announce the biggest increase in NHS funding since 2010 outside the pandemic period, but that's got to be used in a way that gets these waiting lists down, that helps the people waiting for NHS treatment, but crucially also helps to produce the productivity and produce the economic growth that we need. Because the truth is, there are too many people waiting in pain, too many people of working age out of work on long-term sickness benefits, and we've got to do something about both of these things if we're going to meet our economic growth targets and get the rising living standards that we want to see.
James Wilde.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In this document, the Government has downgraded its pledge to have the fastest growing economy in the G7, junked its pledge to cut energy bills by £300, breaking 2 promises to the British people. Of the milestones it is keeping, who is accountable for each one? What are the detailed metrics? Where are the implementation plans? And when ministers take responsibility if they fail to meet them?
If he reads the document carefully, he will see that the growth target is very much in the document. But what the document also says is that it's not enough just to have economic growth. People have to feel it in their standard of living. That should be an important lesson for all of us in politics. Now, he challenges on accountability. Of course, the targets are challenging, but let's look at the alternative. Just to carry on thinking announcements were something real, not have a real focus on delivery, not drive the system. We weren't prepared to do that because, in case he hasn't noticed, there is a crisis of faith in politics out there, and we have set out targets today that will make a real difference to people's lives. I accept that they're challenging, but if we had fewer people waiting in pain, more people able to own their own home, safer streets and a better chance in life for the children who start school, that is change worth having, and that's why we published it.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I welcome this statement here today? Harlow is a town that is plagued by low-paid and insecure work, and people being forced out of work waiting for operations. Can the Chancellor describe how will this plan help tackle these issues for residents in my town? And can I gently say to the party opposite, when they talk about metrics, they are the party that criticised schools during their tenure because apparently half of schools were below average.
I thank the honourable member, and he's right that when people do the right thing and they go out to work and they try to earn a living, they should have a decent reward for what we do, for what they do. And that is why, first of all, it was this party who introduced the concept of a national minimum wage in the first place, opposed by the party opposite, who said it would destroy jobs. And that is why the Chancellor, at the recent budget, announced a significant increase in that wage, so that when people do the right thing, they are rewarded and they can get a decent living for the hard work that they do.
Lisa Smart.
Madam Deputy Speaker, flexible, affordable childcare is a critical part of our economic infrastructure. It gives parents more choice over how to organise their life, and it helps them return to work if they want to, as well, of course, as giving children a really good start in life. Yet nurseries in Marple, in my Hazel Grove constituency, have told me that the government's increase in national insurance charges is going to force them to increase costs to families. The government rightly says they're serious about fixing early years and tackling the attainment gap for disadvantaged children. So do they plan to exempt early years and nursery settings from their ill-advised heights to national insurance charges?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If she looks at the document, she will find that an expansion of nursery places is in the document, because we know it's good for children and it's good for working parents. That is part of the plan that we set out today, and part of our plan to make sure that people in the early years have the best possible start in life. I can't announce anything further from the budget on national insurance, but she knows the background as to why we had to take those decisions.
Josh Fenton-Glynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To listen to the members opposite, one would think we were left a golden legacy. And yet, despite that halcyon legacy we were given, it's a wonder that they were so resoundingly beaten in the last election.
That's why you're over there.
My constituents want an NHS that can be relied on. Yet Lord Darcy's report was very clear. We haven't sorted out the health service and we haven't sorted out social care. Indeed, 13% of NHS beds are taken up by people who could be in social care. Can the Minister outline to me what he will do to make sure that we finally get to grips with this crucial issue? Thank you.
Pat McFadden.
The legacy of the party opposite wasn't just economic or policy. It was also a loss of faith in people's ability for government to do things, and that's part of the backdrop to the plan that we are publishing today. I commend anyone who hasn't read Lord Darcy's report to do so. It sets out in full what that legacy was in terms of health, and that's why in this report and this plan published today, we put getting those waiting lists down at the heart of it, because that drives the whole system. If we get them down, we have a healthier population, more people ready to work, more people to contribute to the country, more people to contribute to our productivity, and that's why it's at the heart of the plan published today.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And if I can thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for taking the time to come to the House to set out where the milestones are. And I think this is a positive move for the government to do, to have that clarity. But what would also be incredibly helpful if the Right Honourable Gentleman could sort of set out how we can keep the House updated, whether it be a 6-monthly basis as to where the plan is developing, how it's tracking along that in terms of delivering that. Because, of course, it is quite a long time until the next general election, and it'd be really good to see how that is progressing across the whole path of the Parliament.
McFadden.
Well, can I welcome the Right Honourable Gentleman's welcome for the plan. It's in marked contrast with the scepticism shown by the front bench towards it. I believe that he will have no problem, us having published the plan, having plenty of opportunities to ask ministers about these things as we go forward. We do know it's challenging to deliver. We haven't yet followed the advice of the honourable gentleman from the SNP to do this every year. But I am sure that the ministers in charge of these goals will keep the House regularly updated.
Louise Jones.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituency of North East Derbyshire saw the highest price rises in the country back in August. This is a direct result of the Conservatives opposing building the houses that are clearly so desperately wanted and needed in my constituency. Can the Minister ensure young people in my constituency who are desperate to buy their own home, start their families and get on with their lives, that Labour will deliver for them?
Pat McFadden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for her question. Look, building more houses is a challenging thing to do because there are always people who will object, there are blockages in the planning system, things take too long. We've got a major planning and infrastructure bill coming in the new year which aims to unblock some of that. We know this target is challenging, but we have to build more houses in this country. And I would say not just houses, but more infrastructure too, if we want to get the economic growth that we need to see. It takes too long for major investments to happen. So I look forward to the party opposite support for our planning and infrastructure bill when it comes forward in the new year.
Danny Chambers.
Deputy Speaker. The last Conservative government brought the NHS to its knees, and theirs is a legacy of crumbling hospitals, of doctors and nurses working at burnout, and of patients being treated in corridors. So Liberal Democrats, we do welcome the extra investment in the NHS, and we support their ambition to get down waiting lists. But you can't support, well, you cannot fix the NHS without fixing social care. And certainly in Hampshire Hospitals Foundation Trust and Winchester Hospital, almost 1 in 5 beds are filled by people who could be cared for with a social care package, but they're stuck in a hospital bed. And that has a knock-on effect of increasing A&E waiting times and then ambulance waiting times and elective surgeries being cancelled. So will the government review the national insurance increase for social care providers and for hospices, and will the government commit to cross-party talks so that we can have a long-term plan to fix social care?
Look, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, but there is a contradiction at the heart of it. He began it by saying he welcomed the extra investment in the NHS, and then ended his question by saying he opposed the national insurance increase that is necessary in order to fund these things. As I've said before, we cannot have a world where people are supporting the extra investment that we've announced, but opposing every revenue-raising measure that contributes towards it. It simply doesn't work like that. If we want to see the extra investment, we have to support the revenue-raising measures that make these things possible.
Antonia Vance.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The plan for change is clear. This government will restore order to the asylum and immigration system clear the asylum backlog, end the use of hotels, increase returns and cut small boat crossings. Does the Minister agree with me that this plan stands in stark contrast to the open borders policy that the party opposite subjected the country to?
McFadden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, it is striking that the party opposite, when they came into power, began their lives by promising to reduce net migration to under 100,000 and bequeathed the situation to us where it was 10 times that. And this happened on their watch with their policies, and now we are left to clear up this situation and restore some order to our migration policy. Now, the country will always need migration, but the document sets out what my honourable friend said, that we will reduce net migration and deal with the illegal migration in the way that she set out.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased to read that the drive of Labour is for the working man and woman, and that has to be welcomed. However, and I very much welcome the £25 billion for the NHS, because it would be very prudish of me not to welcome that or anybody else in the House to do the same. But I have to say this: the budget delivered it put a question mark on the viability of working farms. It stripped the pensioner of their winter fuel allowance this summer and winter, and it puts what could possibly be an unsustainable pressure on 99% of micro and small businesses in Northern Ireland. That is not helping the working man or the working woman. And with the greatest respect to government, Minister, sincerely, I want the Labour Party, everybody in this House wants the Labour Party to succeed for the country and for the people. But when it comes to that, you might actually, I maybe want you one more than most, if I can say that. But I ask once again this question: will government have the strength to acknowledge and to put right the wrong calls made, and to lead this great nation successfully to prosperity, with no pensioner or small business or family farm left behind?
McFadden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I appreciate the spirit in which the honourable member asked this question. On farms, as the Chancellor made clear, for a couple there would be an allowance of £3 million before any inheritance obligation kicked in, and then it would be at half the rate that other people have to pay. So there's significant protection built into this. And on pensioners, it is very important to remember that we have said we will protect the triple lock, and that's reflected in the pension increase that's been announced for the next year.
Alex Ballinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. After 14 years of repeated broken promises, it is hardly surprising that many people are distrustful about politicians and the ability of government to do anything positive. Does the Minister agree with me that in setting out a clear plan for change, the government is offering the British people not just the hope of a better future, but clear, measurable metrics against which it can be held to account?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think this question of distrust and loss of faith is really important, because after so much chaos in recent years, it's very easy for our constituents to turn off from politics, to think that no government of any political colour can deliver for them. We were determined not to allow that to set in, and not to allow that scepticism to just become the norm. So we've set out targets here, which I acknowledge, not for the first time today, are challenging. They are difficult to meet. These are not easy things to meet, but progress towards them, with lower waiting times, more houses built, and the other things set out in the document, will show that the government is trying to deliver for people, that politics can produce productive change, and that is change worth having.
Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I, too, like my right honourable friend, welcome these milestones and agree with what the right honourable gentleman has just said about the need to restore trust. Could I ask him how Labour's health policies in England will differ from those that they have pursued in Wales?
Well, I'm sure in every part of the country, the governments that run the NHS want to see waiting lists fall. But we have put this at the heart of the plan for change today because we believe it drives the whole system and because the levels of satisfaction with the NHS that we inherited were the lowest ever recorded. No government can be content with that, and I tell him honestly, no Labour government is content with it, and that's why it's an important part of the plan today.
Sarah Coombs.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In West Brom, there is one issue that dominates all else, and it's the fact that people are working harder and harder, but they can afford less and less. And that is the record of the party opposite, who crashed our economy and who oversaw the worst cost of living crisis in a generation. Can the Minister set out how this plan for change will make ordinary people better off and deliver exactly the thing that people voted for in July?
I very much welcome the question from my parliamentary neighbour. And we represent very similar communities, and I agree with her that when people go out to work and do the right thing, they want to be rewarded in the right way. That is why we protected the pay slips of people in the recent budget. It's why we announced an increase in the minimum wage in the recent budget. It's why we made sure carers could earn more before losing part of their revenue in the recent budget. We want work to be rewarded. We are the Labour Party. We're the party of Labour. When people do the right thing, they should be treated fairly for it.
Warinder Just.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Conservatives opposite have always claimed to be the party of law and order, but they were the ones who took police officers off the streets. Knife, youth crime, antisocial behaviour and local drug activity are some of the most common complaints in my constituency. Can I first of all welcome Labour government's urgent action to recruit more neighbourhood police officers, and as my right honourable friend knows my constituency well, as it adjoins his constituency in Wolverhampton, can he please confirm that it will make a real difference to my constituents?
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome a question from the parliamentary neighbour on the other side of my constituency. He's right that people in his constituency and mine care deeply about the safety of their community. They saw the cuts in policing that happened after the party opposite came to power. They saw their neighbourhood officers being more and more stretched, trying to cover more and more area with not enough officers. So it's really important to restore that sense of community policing so that people feel safe in their communities, safe in their streets, because as I say, that is the underpinning of the freedom that people need to live their lives.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his speech and statement today. When these achievements are reached, it will have a profound impact on communities like mine, because for too long people have been told the government doesn't work, and people need to understand that when government is done well, it can and will work. So with that in mind, isn't it the case that the British people need these milestones for progress after 14 years of milestones of failure?
McFadden.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think my honourable friend makes a very good point, because let's just consider, as I said in my statement, if we didn't do these things, we would just be carrying on with the situation we have where, for example, young people work harder and harder and they think, how am I ever going to get a home of my own? Or where people are waiting for NHS treatment and they're told the wait might have to be 18 months, 2 years. It's too long to wait for treatment. That's why we put these things at the heart of the document today. They'll make a real difference to people's lives if we manage to meet them. They are challenging, but doing it like this can help drive the system and make progress towards these goals.
Claire Hazelgrove.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, the NHS has long been a top issue raised by local residents when I've been out knocking on doors across the whole of the Filton and Bradley Stoke constituency. So may I begin by welcoming not only the investment but the reform as well that's coming alongside that, and these clear milestones for change today, which is what the country voted to see. But may I ask the Minister for commitment also on behalf of the government that no matter the lack of support from the party opposite, that he will persevere with this, as this is what the country wants to see.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can assure her, I can give her that commitment, and I can assure her of the passion that the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care feels for this goal, feels for turning around the system, and feels for reducing the waiting lists and waiting times that people are faced with. He appreciates the importance of this. He knows how important it is for the patients themselves and for our goal of growing the economy, and that's why it's part of the document today.
Andy McNay.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome each and every one of these milestones and the real and tangible difference they will make to the lives of my residents in Rossendale and Darwin. Each are a crucial step on that process of mission delivery. I also welcome the recognition that to get this done, we need to do government differently. Devolution and the move away from command and control government represents a real opportunity to enable more effective and efficient delivery and perhaps even restore some trust in politics so broken and destroyed by the party opposite. In this regard, in my county of Lancashire, we've been held back by an outdated two-tier local government system. So would the Minister agree with me that it's time for Lancashire leaders to come together and to grasp the huge opportunity that devolution offers?
McFadden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I said in my remarks that for these goals to be reached, it would require reform in the state itself. And I think part of that is about local delivery. There's been a lot of innovation in recent years. We started the process of devolution when we were in power. The party opposite took it forward with the creation of a number of mayors around the country. I think there's further to go with this, and I think that having mayors and strong local leaders as partners can really help us deliver the goals set out in the document today.
Mark Sewards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I start by welcoming the Minister's statement today? He has set out concrete, deliverable and measurable milestones against which the British public can judge us against. What a stark contrast to the opposition front bench, who still refuse to even acknowledge the Liz Truss economic disaster that was the mini-budget and still refuse to apologise for it. Given these facts, will my right honourable friend agree with me that we are very unlikely to see any sort of U-turn that sees them back our steps to restore economic stability? And does he think it's likely that they will continue to cling to the magic money tree?
McFadden.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. They did deliver some things. They delivered a huge economic crash. They delivered a Bank of England intervention in order to prop up the pension system. They delivered significant increases in mortgage rates for people that are still paying today. I do believe that the most important thing about defeat is to learn from it. And I have to say, observing the party opposite at the moment, that is not something they are yet doing.
Joe Morris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The legacy of 14 years of the Conservatives in government and a century of Tory complacency in Hexham constituency is seen with police numbers in Prudhoe having fallen under the last government, and indeed in Calais and Throckley as well, and in our most rural communities where rural crime is unfortunately something that's brought up to me regularly and is an example of how the party opposite has failed to understand the modern countryside. So can the Minister outline for me how this plan will make a measurable change for our rural communities as well as towns like Prudhoe?
I thank the honourable friend very much for his question, and I think the goals in this document can make a real difference to rural communities. We know that many people in rural communities are worried about rural crime, so more neighbourhood policing can help them. We also know that many young people in rural communities are wondering how they can ever have a home of their own. And that is why we support more house building, we support lower waiting lists, and we support the neighbourhood policing teams that are set out in the document today.
Final question, Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am last, but I'll try not to take too long. I welcome the scale of ambition in the Secretary of State's statement, but I do wish to challenge one point, and that was the fact about there being only one millstone in the UK. My residents in Edinburgh South West increasingly feel held back by our incoherent Scottish Government. And yesterday was a fine example of that, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the Scottish Parliament, the SNP government set out its budget, a budget largely funded by the hard work of Scottish Labour MPs in this place. The biggest ever settlement, for Scotland, Madam Deputy Speaker. Meanwhile, the Scottish SNP MPs were in this place voting against the money-raising measures. They want their cake and they want to get it. And I see the member for Agab.
The point of statement questions is that they should be short and not a speech. So perhaps the honourable member would like to come to the conclusion of his question.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's always good to be guided by you. So my question was for the Secretary of State was, he did set out how living standards are going to increase right across the UK, and Scotland is part of that. So how is he going to work with the Scottish Government and the incoherent SNP Government to do that? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his question. He is absolutely right to point out that the recent devolution financial settlements were the biggest in real terms since devolution was introduced as a consequence of the announcements made by the Labour Chancellor at the budget. That is what has provided the funding, and it is completely incoherent to welcome that funding, in fact to run around portraying how you're going to spend it on this and that, and then to vote against the revenue measures that contribute to it in the first place. The truth is, if we want to see increased investments, if we want to boost services, we have to support the revenue-raising measures that make that possible. And when we've done that, we have to combine the investment with the reform necessary to deliver. And that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the next step. Thank you.
Can I thank the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster for that statement, which